So these are SATA power plugs. Those will correspond with the SATA power plug on your SSD or your hard drive. And they do have a slight little L shape to them, so make sure that you plug them in the right way. And with that L shape, it's pretty impossible to plug them in wrong, but bear in mind that the plugs are a little delicate, so make sure that you reality check that you're plugging it in the correct way. Beyond that, next to there, you have a data connector, and that's where your SATA cable will go. Since we're already showing this, I might as well also show the SATA cable. There it is right there. One end connects up to your hard drive or SSD, like that. And then the other end of that SATA cable would plug into your motherboard. Finally, the last peripheral connector you might spot is this little 4-pin guy. This is typically referred to as a Molex plug, and these are a little bit older, so you might not encounter them, but you will see them sometimes for case fan connection, connecting up a pump for an all-in-one liquid cooler or something like that. Just bear in mind that you might have an additional plug set in your modular power supply kit that allows you to connect up those connectors, but they won't always be needed. It just depends on what hardware you have in your system. All right, guys, I've pretty much laid out everything as far as the parts and how everything is connected. Now what we have to do is get it all installed in the case, and then of course plug in those plugs into the plugs I just showed you that they plug into. I'm gonna start off with the power supply just because that goes in the bottom down here. And for that purpose, I've just flipped the case over entirely. And we'll drop that in like so. You can put your fan on your power supply facing down or facing up. I usually try to face it to where there's a dust filter. Since there's a dust filter right there, that's the way I'm going to face this. At this point, since I already showed you which modular cables we need, and we have easy access to the bottom of the power supply, I'm going to go ahead and connect those up. And now a move that I will probably come to regret, which is to reinstall this bottom piece. I probably won't need to access it down there again, but you know, if things get tight, I can always pull this back off. Now I've routed all these cables up here, kind of up. They're not where they need to be, but they're up here, so I can see what's what. And then at the bottom here is kind of where your motherboard will go, and there are 4 mounting points for this. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Bear in mind, since this is a mini ATX build, it's very small. If you're using a larger, like a micro ATX or a full-size ATX case, you might have 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 standoff points. But make sure you have standoffs or the raised mounting points there. You do not want to mount the motherboard directly to the case. Forgetting standoffs is something, I don't know how common it is, but it's definitely something you want to avoid because it can damage your hardware if it's not done properly. Remember the I/O shield? That lines up with the inputs and outputs on the back of the motherboard, so just like that, but it's got to go in the case. And for the case, make sure I have this little knockout part right here. If we line that up and apply pressure from the inside, it should pop into place. Depending on the quality of your I/O shield, sometimes this can be challenging, especially if the metal is flexing or that kind of thing. Use the butt of a screwdriver from the inside to push it into place if you have any trouble. Now that that is installed, we shall take our pre-prepared motherboard with the CPU and heatsink fan and memory already installed, take that I/O and line it up with the I/O shield that you just also installed, and then your 4 mounting points should line up with the 4 holes in your mini ITX motherboard. Now, if you're looking at the screws that came with your case, you might notice that some have this kind of finer thread like on the right here, and some have the kind of rougher thread like on the left here. The standoffs for your motherboard may be either one, so it's good to reality check beforehand. I actually got it right on the first try. It was the rough thread. UNC 632. Okay, one more piece of hardware to put in the case, and then we just gotta plug everything in. This is a 2.5-inch drive, so most SSDs are going to be 2.5-inch drives like this one, unless you get an M.2 like I showed you guys at the beginning. And then you might have larger drives, 3.5-inch drives. Here's an example of one of those. These are much bigger, and they're usually mechanical drives, and they spin and they make noise and stuff like that. If you have one of those, it will be able to slot into a 3.5-inch drive mount. And this case happens to have 2 of those. These are held on by a little thumb screw. So with a touch of finagling, I was able to remove that tray, and this tray would be able to support a 3.5-inch drive like that one. And then sometimes the drives will mount through the sides. And if you're using a spinning drive like this one, you'd probably want to make use of these little rubber grommets here. then screw the drive in through that. That will provide a little bit of dampening for the noise that a spinning mechanical hard drive might make. Or if you don't want to worry about your system making any noise with spinning mechanical hard drives, just go with all SSDs. Typically an SSD can mount to that same tray. It's also got mounts through the bottom, so we're going to do that. I mentioned the fine thread and the thick thread. This is where that fine threaded screw is going to go. This is an M3. Took me a sec, but it got there. So there's our last piece of hardware that needed to be mounted, now mounted. So guys, at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and start plugging stuff in, but for those of you who might be building a system like this with a graphics card, I wanted to point out that this is where you would install the graphics card, and it would go in this slot down here at the bottom. This is known as a PCI Express Graphics by 16 slots. It would basically line up like that. You'd slot in the PCI Express graphics slot down there at the bottom. You're also, of course, going to need to remove these two little brackets here at the back, and then there's usually some mounting mechanism at the top that will hold that all in place. And then, of course, just connect up your PCI Express graphic power to that, and you'd be all set to go. But again, we're not using a graphics card today, so we don't need to worry about that. So let's begin. Power plugs, 24 pin. There we go. Any excess cable, I'm just going to kind of feed back and try to tuck down here into this bottom section. Bottom section is our cable junk area where we will put as much extra cable junk as possible. We also have the need for a SATA power connector over here for the SSD, so I'll go ahead and plug that in. While we're here again, let's go ahead and connect up the SSD's data connection via our little SATA cable here. Little clasp should pop into place. So we now have power and data going to the SSD. Power is connected to the power supply. Data cable from the SSD here to the plug on the motherboard that is directly behind it. We also have that awkwardly placed 8-pin supplemental CPU power. Next is our HD audio cable. This plugs in right up here, kind of near where that CPU power connector was. All of these connectors on the motherboard are all labeled on the motherboard itself. But the motherboard manual is actually a really, really good resource to go to if you're not positive where the actual plugs might plug into. Other than that, we just have the USB 3 and this extra fan plug for our front intake fan. So I mentioned how much I hate front panel connectors. They're always really annoying. These are, if you can see, they're kind of color-coded right there. The 9 or so pins that I'm sort of trying to point towards. Oh, that's really challenging. Anyway, they're all right there, they're all labeled, and I'm going to attempt to plug them in. Making this even more difficult is the fact that some of them are labeled plus or minus, positive or negative. The LEDs, power LED and hard drive LED, are the only pins you need to worry about that plus minus on. Everything else doesn't matter if it's plugged in one way or the other. All right, those front panel connectors sure were annoying, but as you maybe can see, most of the cables going over to plug into the motherboard are kind of in this area right here. Beyond that, you will probably notice kind of a rat's nest of cables that's just down here in the front, up in front of the power supply. That's not a big deal because most of the air is coming in from the front of the case, and it's going to be flowing up here and over most of your components that you're worried about. Beyond that, I can go ahead and start putting the panels back on. So here's the top panel. Now if you're a superstitious person, then you should not put this final side panel back on. Leave at least one side panel off until you've started the system up. Make sure it's up and running. And now, as far as I can tell, this computer is all put together. So I'm going to flip the switch on the power supply in the back, and then I will test the power switch right up here in the front. Fans spin up. I've got an LED that's lit up on the side right here as well. And if you happen to have any LEDs that are part of your motherboard, for example, like my AB350N Wi-Fi motherboard from Gigabyte has some red LEDs on it, you should see those light up as well. Fan spinning though, that's always a good thing. And that's pretty much all there is to it when it comes to assembling a computer like this. I will say, there's one last part I want to do right here. I am now allowed to do this. And with that, we have a functional gaming PC, and we didn't even have to spend $1,000 on a $250 graphics card. So that's pretty nice. I like that. Also, really like the fact that you could pop in a discrete graphics card to this system and upgrade it if they become more affordable in the future. I also like the fact that since this is an AM4 chipset motherboard, right now we've got a quad core in there. There's 8-core, like 1800X CPUs available for this same platform. So you could upgrade in the future to a system with a discrete graphics card and an 8-core CPU with 16 threads, which would give you a ton of performance for gaming and streaming, doing video editing at the same time. So a lot of versatility and flexibility in this system as well as this platform, which is why I was pretty excited that AMD was actually bringing these Raven Ridge APUs to market, especially learning that the 2200G is only $99 for the CPU and the GPU together in one. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the thumbs up button. If you're at a loss for what to do next, I will link my first 5 things to do with a new PC build in this video's description. That will take you to the next steps of getting Windows loaded, making sure your BIOS is set up correctly, making sure any drives that you add on there are set up properly as well. And there's a follow-up video where you can work on setting up Steam and getting your games loaded and that sort of thing too. Thank you so much for watching this video though, guys. Share it with your friends if you think that they would like to build a new computer like this as well. And of course, hit that thumbs up button on the way out if you enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in the next video.